Alright, in this video, we're going to create that 3D scene with the animations that you just saw at the beginning of this video. That animation was made in Apple Motion using a plugin called mO2 from MotionVFX. Though I'm no professional when it comes to animating, I've been messing around with this stuff for about a year and a half. mO2, I've been messing around with it for about a month, but it definitely has sparked my interest even more in animation. From start to finish in this tutorial, we will create a 3D scene, and it's going to have some 3D text. We're going to mess around with some styles. We're going to use some models in our 3D scene, and we're going to apply various materials. We're going to be using the active camera and the perspective camera, which allows us to position objects correctly. I'm also going to show you how to animate a grid of numbers, and we're going to apply some illuminance to those numbers. We're going to be duplicating some models, and for quick adjustments, we will be applying some references. We'll also be keyframing 4 cameras, and we'll be adjusting their position and rotation as we jump from one camera to the next. We're going to be using some audio in our animation as well, and we can quickly adjust those keyframes of our cameras to match that of the audio. And then we'll also look at some environment lighting as well as animating a sphere light. So there's a lot to cover. Hopefully I can give you some pointers on my workflow, if you will, through the last month and a half that I've been messing around with mO2. So in Apple Motion, a blank project, 30 frames per second for 10 seconds. Let's go ahead and load that up. Let's go ahead and add the generator for mO2. So generators, MotionVFX mO2. I'm going to hide the project pane. I'm going to hide the timeline. And I'm going to make my keyframes window just a hair smaller. And I'm going to fit the canvas to the window. Now to activate mO2, where we get a little menu up here, we can right click and go to control, or you could come down here and go to adjust item, either way. But now we have this menu across the top. Let's head over to the inspector, and here's where we're going to be adding things, materials, objects, and all that good stuff. And then we'll be keyframing some stuff down here, and let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with the 3D text. So add 3D text. I'm going to leave my default camera at this angle for right now so that we can see the changes that we're about to make to this text. With the text selected, come down to styles, and I'm just going to do carbon and chrome. That immediately changes the way that text looks, and I actually want to change it even more, but styles are there for your convenience. The lighting's not the best right now because of the environment lighting, but that's totally fine. We'll come in here later and adjust some lights. I have some ideas for this text that I want to go ahead and apply. So we can edit the face. We can click on that little circle there. This is going to allow us to change the material, and this will be for the face of the mO2. So for materials, let's go to basic surfaces, and I'm going to use basic surface 1. That definitely changed the way the front, the face of this text looks. Now we can adjust the texture mapping. We can use maybe cubic. That might look pretty good. I find that a lot of times texture mapping for cubic works pretty good for getting my material to look the way I want it to look. Or to be quite honest with you, UV look just fine as well. So no big deal. It's up to you. The bevel. I want to change my bevel. I want to make my bevel. Another way we can change this material here, with that selected, I can go to this little circle and I want to apply chrome, and that's going to be underneath metal. So now we can see our bevel's different. With the text selected, scrolling down below styles, I'm going to actually set the bevel shape to bevel, and that changes it just a little bit, and we can actually see the environment getting reflected in that chrome bevel right there. I'm also going to change the body itself. For its material, I'm going to do another basic surface, and I'll do basic surface 4. Clicking OK on that, and if I rotate around in my active camera, let's just get a better view of that body right here, and let's see what happens if we change this to cubic for the mapping. So that does change it, but I like UV here as well. So now that we have that done, I'm going to go to default camera. Underneath basic, with the default camera selected, I'm going to reset everything, and this positions the camera right in the middle of the environment. Taking my position Z and sliding it on out, now we can get a better view of our text straight ahead. Now let's start to work on our stage, that back piece that you saw, and it's actually a cylinder, and we're going to apply perforated metal 2 to that. So let's go add, model, primitives, cylinder. I don't want the cylinder to be this tall, so we can come down here and adjust the height. maybe somewhere around 0.1, very thin. Let's take the cylinder and let's rotate it on its x-axis so that we see the top of the cylinder facing towards us. And I'm actually going to set that to 90 degrees. Now we can adjust the scale, but I'm going to actually adjust the radius, and I'm going to set that to 2. Now I'm going to select my text, and I'm going to use the 3D gizmo to somewhat center up this text in this circle. Maybe a little bit to the left as well. We can fine-tune that later if needed. Now I'm going to switch my camera over to perspective. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to rotate. And what we can see right here is that this text is actually kind of inside this cylinder. I'm going to take my text, make sure I have the text selected, take the 3D gizmo and slide this up just a little bit. I'm going to rotate my perspective camera, and I pretty much just want that text sitting on this side of the stage, if you will. That looks pretty good. Let's go back to the active camera. Let's go to the cylinder and let's apply material. So I'm going to come down here, apply material, and it's metal, and we want perforated metal 2. Now this is a prime example of when cubic is going to look better in my opinion. So texture mapping for this material, cubic, and notice that it didn't change anything. Well, if I come back up here and make sure I have that thing selected, come back down here to materials, for the texture mapping, let's set it to cubic, and it did change it now. There's actually very small holes there. Let's go to mapping settings, and let's change the tile size of the X and the Y to 3, and what you'll notice is the holes are quite a bit bigger. This will allow some light to come in from the back of the stage, and it'll really help that MO2 pop towards the end of our animation. And before we start to work on the wall, I'm actually going to come back to perspective, and I'm going to make this stage here a little bit thinner. So I'm going to select it, and that cylinder coming down to its height, I'm going to make it even shorter, and I have a reason for this, and I'll show you that in a minute. So I got it set to 0.05 now, and I'm just going to select off of that so that I can still see that that text is somewhat sitting on the stage, so maybe somewhere around there. Let me rotate my perspective camera, and the text is not coming through, so that's better. Switching back to active. Now let's work on the wall around this stage. But before I do that, I'm going to come to this cylinder, and I'm going to call that the perforated metal. And now let's add a new model, primitive, and the shape I'm looking for is a tube. And the tube is a lot like a cylinder, except it has a hole going through the center of it. So adding that tube, let's make this a little bit shorter, maybe 0.5. Let's rotate it 90 degrees, and now we can see our hole. Let's set the outer radius to 2, and then the inner radius, we can adjust this to make it a lot bigger as well. And really what I want here is a thin wall, so I'm going to set this somewhere close to 2, like 1.98. If that's too thin, you can make it thicker, 1.95 maybe, and we can come back and adjust that later if needed. Switching over to perspective, we can see that the stage is kind of showing through just a little bit. To fix that, we can either adjust the perforated metal, or we can adjust the tube, the radius of one or the other. I'm going to come to that perforated metal, and I'm going to take its radius and make it 1.99. And what that's going to do is it's going to hide this that you see bleeding through the wall. So pressing enter on that, now we can't see that stage bleeding through the wall. Maybe just a hair smaller, 1.98. And now with the tube, I'm going to go ahead and call that the wall. I'm going to take the 3D gizmo, and I'm going to slide this up to where the stage and the wall are kind of flush with each other. Something like that. Now we'll come here in a moment and add 2 tauruses to the front and the back of the wall to clean up the looks there. But for now, let's take this tube wall and let's apply material. And the material I'm going to use here, it's going to be a technical, and it's an electronic board. Now this does not look like an electronic board to me, and this is where the texture mapping, setting it to cubic, will make this look a lot better. Switching back to active, that looks good. The next thing I'd like to do is working on the numbers that we're rotating around on this wall. And a quick way to do that, we can duplicate this tube wall. I'm going to right click on it, click duplicate, and I'm going to change this to tube code 1. I want to change the material of tube code 1, and I'm going to set that material to a grid and I want grid 11. Clicking OK on that. Let's switch back to perspective to get a better view. And now we have these numbers. That's what the grid 11 is doing. And the numbers look good here because I did copy that wall and we had the texture mapping set to cubic, but I want these numbers to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to set the tile size to 2 for each of these. So I changed the tile size X and the Y. Now the numbers are showing on the outside, and if we switch back to the active camera, they also are showing on the inside as well. I'm just going to take this active camera, slide it on over, zoom on in, and I'm going to rotate it so we can see those numbers. Now I'm okay with the numbers being on the inside and the outside of the wall, but we need to test the rotation and see if these numbers are going to get cut off. But before I do that, for this tube code 1, I'm going to come down to illuminance, and I'm going to bump that illuminance up, maybe to 1. So now the numbers are brighter. Coming back up to the scene settings for tube code 1, with that selected, I want to add a keyframe, and I actually want to rotate this thing on its z-axis. Watch what happens when we rotate on the z-axis. It is rotating the numbers, but what you may notice is that the numbers are kind of getting cut off. And to fix that, let's make the outer radius just a little bit bigger, like 2.01 perhaps. That's going to be on the outside. We'll see that when we switch back to perspective. And the inner radius, let's make it a little bit shorter, maybe 1.93. That's going to bring that text in just a little bit. And again, just watch this text over here as I change these numbers. If I change that to 1.95, that's pushing the text back closer to the wall. I'm going to bring it in just a little bit, 1.93. When I press enter, watch this text here. So notice it did slide in. And now if we adjust our rotation, it's probably not going to get cut off, and that looks good right there. So let's keyframe this. Starting at 0 degrees, and at 1 frame, I'm going to add a keyframe for rotation Z. I'm going to scroll over to the end of the entire thing at 300 frames, and I'm going to set this to maybe 45. And for this keyframe, I'm going to set the interpolation to linear. Let's scroll back to the beginning, and let's play it and see how it looks. Making sure nothing's getting cut off. And don't worry about this text fading in and out here. We will fix that in a moment. I'm going to switch over to perspective and make sure that text looks good as well. And nothing's getting cut off there. So that looks just fine. So switching back to the active camera. What I want to do with tube code 1, I want to duplicate this, and I'm going to call this tube code 2. And what I want to do with tube code 2, it's keyframed as well. Since I did duplicate that tube code 1, I'm just going to come to the end and I'm going to set its rotation to -45. So these numbers will rotate in opposite directions. And now if we play this, we have numbers going in opposite directions. Now, suppose I want to come in here and change some colors. We're going to apply some references here. I'm going to select the material for tube code 1. I'm going to come down to its illuminance, and I'm going to change this color to something that's definitely different, like a red. So we have a red and a white, but it didn't change both of them. So what we can do to be able to quickly edit multiple things at one time, if we want them to be the same, I'm going to take this red material and I'm just going to drag it over top of this white, and I'm going to apply a reference. What that immediately did was change all of our colors to red, and now we can come in here and change just one of these textures, coming back to the illuminance, and if I set this to a blue, everything's changing to a blue. Not only that, if I come up here and select the other one, tube code 2, I can still go edit it, and it's going to change both of them at the same time. I'm going to switch that illuminance back to white, and I'm going to play that. Checking out the perspective. That looks good as well. Now the next thing we want to focus on is putting a piece right here on the corner to flush that, and the same thing up here at the top of the wall. I mentioned I was going to use a torus, but I tell you what, I'm going to use another tube. So I'm going to add model primitives and get the tube. I'm going to make this tube a lot shorter. Let's start with 0.1. The outer radius I'm going to set to something a little bit bigger than 2, maybe 2.1. The inner radius I'm going to try 1.95. Going to rotate this 90 degrees. And that actually looks pretty good where it is. Let's check out the active camera to see what the inside looks like. And we don't see it coming through here. So I definitely need to make a few adjustments to get this to look the way I want it to. I'm going to go to my inner radius and I'm going to try 1.9. We can see it is coming through now. Let's try 1.85. Not bad. The numbers are hiding pretty good too. I might need to move the Z position a little bit to get rid of these white lines. So Z position, let's just try 0.01. And that's hiding those pretty good, and those numbers are okay. Yeah, sure, it's touching a little bit, but I'm okay with that. Let me switch back to perspective, and I'm okay with that as well. Checking out the back, not bad. Let's apply material to this. So for the tube, I'm going to add a white material for right now, basic surface 8. Set the texture mapping to cubic. All right. Now I'm going to duplicate this, and so I don't get them confused, I'm gonna call one of them tube back, the other one tube front. And for the tube front, I'm going to slide it up with the 3D gizmo somewhere around there. Let's check out the active camera. I'm okay with that. Now let's attach a reference. So we're applying a reference, and we can now change the material of one, and it should change both of them. So I want to set this basic surface, and I'm going to do basic surface 7. If you couldn't tell, I'm a fan of darker colors. Okay on that. Back to perspective. Looks good. Now let's take all of this stuff, and since this is making up our entire 3D scene, I'm just going to click on the top one, tube code 2 or whatever it may be on yours, and I'm going to hold shift and click the bottom one. I'm going to right click and I'm going to group all of this. I'm going to call this stage. That just cleans up our scene content a little bit better. And before we jump into cameras, let's talk about a little bit of lighting. And first of all, I'm going to go to my scene settings. I'm going to go to the environment. And I'm going to keyframe the horizontal offset. I want you to notice how some things, especially the bevels, those chrome bevels, if I start changing the horizontal offset, you can see, and even on the stage, that it's definitely changing the way this looks. So I want to keyframe this, but I'm also going to change my environment as well. Go to CG, go to Soft, and let me try this inline studio lighting. Clicking OK on that, and now that's definitely changing things as well. So that's some environment lighting, and I'm definitely going to keyframe this. But before I do that, let me go back to my stage, and I need to get that camera out of there. So dragging that on out, closing my stage, taking the default camera, and I'm going to reset the parameters again, and I'm going to drag out on that Z so that I can see my entire stage. Maybe this text could be moved down a little bit. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me, but just a little bit more centered. Let's head back into the environment and let's keyframe the horizontal offset. It doesn't really matter where we start, just kind of get whatever look you want, maybe a little bit brighter, so somewhere in here, who knows. Keyframe it, slide to the end, and you can move this however you want. I'm going to set the interpolation to linear, and let's play this. So my FPS is at 18, it's going to look a little bit different, but we do get some change in the light, not much. And the reason why is because I'm starting at 159 and I'm only going to 149. So let's change that to maybe 100 to have a more of a rotation in that environment. So there is some change there. Inside of my scene settings, I'm going to go to the background and I'm going to set the radial gradient to a darker color. Now let's move on to cameras, and I have this default camera here, and I'm going to switch over to perspective, and we can see our camera sitting over here. With that camera we can adjust its position obviously, and we can even do rotations, but if I rotate it on the X right now, it's rotating about its anchor point. You can adjust the anchor point down here, but I don't even mess with it. I can find by using a null, I'm able to achieve most of the camera animations that I want. So again, looking at the rotation here, and then we have the rotation Y. But what I find myself wanting sometimes is I want this camera to not rotate about this anchor point, but maybe somewhere in the center of my environment. I'm going to reset this parameter, and I'm going to drag the camera back out, and I'm going to add a null. I'm going to call this null1, and I'm going to call this camera1. Now what I do is I throw this camera into a null, and I use the null for the rotation most of the time, and I use the camera for the position most of the time. So I have my camera selected, I can still position the camera however I want, but for null, notice this now. If I rotate along the X, notice what the camera's doing. It's not rotating about this point, it's rotating about the null. Since the camera's sitting inside the null, and if we rotate the null, this is going to let the camera continue looking at wherever the center of the null is, and in this case the position of the null is in the center of the environment. Switching over to active camera, and if we rotate the null, you can see that it's still looking at the same spot every time, and that is the center of the null. With that in mind, let's go ahead and put this camera where we want to start our animation at. So using the position with the camera selected, I'm going to come on in real close. I'm going to use the null rotation. You could use the camera's rotation here, but I'm going to use the null, and I'm going to rotate about its y-axis. I'm going to keep my x at 0 right now. And then what we're going to do is position the camera further down here closer to these numbers and to the edge of that M. So I'm going to move the camera to the left. I'm going to bring the Z even closer. And it's okay if the Z becomes negative, because as we start keyframing and animating this, we're going to realize that we can just move this camera back and we can have a nice rotation going with the combination of null rotation, camera position. So maybe somewhere around there is where we want to start our animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to keyframe the positions of the camera. Even if I don't have a position applied, you can always go back and tweak this to your liking. I'm also going to come to my null 1 and keyframe the rotations. So again, remember, I'm going to be keyframing the rotations in the null and the positions of the camera. I'm going to go ahead about 60 frames, and I'm going to start changing the position. So I'm maybe going to slide this back. And notice it looks like we're going inside of the M, but we can take this Z and back off of it a little bit. We can slide to the right a little bit more if we want. And if you want to tweak the rotation just a little bit, maybe something like that. And with all of these things that have happened, I mean, we can even do a little bit of rotation here if you'd like. Mess around with your Z if you want. You can come to camera 1. You can adjust the Y position. Totally custom look. What I'm going to do to all these keyframes. So right now I got my camera, I got the positions keyframed, and I'm going to set the interpolation for all of these to linear. I think a linear interpolation for these movements gives a nice camera animation or transition. I'm going to do the same thing for the null, the rotations that we've keyframed, interpolation to linear. And let's play this. Now, obviously when we render this, it's going to be even smoother. Now before I go any further with the camera, I think we need to go ahead and put our audio in here so that I can keyframe it to the audio waveforms to help sell this animation even more. So File, Import as Audio. I have my audio imported. I'm going to view the audio waveform, and I'm just going to go to my layers and I'm going to hide MO2 for a second. And I'm going to come in here and add markers in this audio waveform where I want my keyframes to occur. So I have my 3 markers here, and we're going to keyframe our cameras to switch at these markers, and hopefully that will be in a good sync with the audio. So showing MO2 and hiding the project pane again. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that we can see some keyframes down here. And now notice what I need to do here is I need to come to this first marker. This is where I want this first camera to actually stop animating, and notice my keyframes are over here. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to come here and I'm going to keyframe these again, and you can see that those keyframes are getting added. That was for the null rotation, and I'm going to repeat this process for the camera position. Now I'm going to come and delete those old keyframes, and I'm just going to make sure I have my interpolation set to linear yet again. Repeating this for the null, let's delete the old keyframes. Interpolation set to linear. Now we're ready to make our jump to the next camera, and to do this I'm actually going to keyframe the camera. From the beginning it's going to be visible, and then right here is where we want to switch to camera 2. So I need to make camera 1 not visible. Now this is going to switch to the perspective view if you don't have any more cameras in your scene. But the minute we come in here and add another camera, this camera here, I'm going to move it out of this null group, and I'm going to call this camera 2. I'm going to add another null, and I'm going to call this null, null 2. Let's throw the camera 2 into the null 2. I'm going to minimize null 1 for right now. And let's focus on positioning camera 2 on the right side, focusing over here on the side where we have the 2 in MO2. So I'm going to reset the parameters for camera 2, back it on out. And we'll worry about the visibility right here in a moment, but let's go ahead and get it positioned where we want it. So bringing it much closer. Using the null for my rotation. Making sure we're facing this side now. Using the camera, I'm going to position this over to the right. Bring it even closer, probably not that far. And increasing my Z. Just get it wherever you want it to start. Right there looks good to me. And let's go ahead and keyframe. So for null, I'm going to keyframe the rotations. Maybe we want to add a little bit more of some other types of rotations as well. Keyframing those. And then I'm going to come to camera, the position, keyframing those. Sliding over to where I want this camera to finish off, right there at that marker. How do we want this camera to finish? Well, I'm going to want to slide back towards the O in MO2. Probably zoom out a little bit or back off of the stage some with my Z. Take my null, let's adjust the rotation to give it a little more flare. And maybe I don't want to come back as far, so I'm going to take my position and actually push it over to the right some and maybe make it a little bit closer. So camera 2, we got some positions keyframed. I'm going to go to interpolation and apply the linear piece and do the same thing for the null. And now we're going to have this jump automatically happen. Here's camera 1, we jump to camera 2. And you can come in here and tweak these rotations and positions to your liking. But here's why it automatically jumped to camera 2. If we come back to camera 1, we have camera 1 set to be visible in this spot of the project. But then when we hit here, camera 1 is no longer visible. The order in which your cameras are over here in the scene content, if a camera's not visible, which is what we have going on in here for camera 1, it's going to jump to the next camera that is visible. So we want to keep these in order. Camera 1, camera 2, and now let's focus on camera 3. But before I do that, I need to set camera 2. I'm going to keyframe camera 2. Here, I want camera 2 to not be visible, but I'm going to go ahead and come back here to the beginning, keyframe the very beginning for camera 2 to be visible, but you won't see it until camera 1 becomes not visible right there. Again, it's all about the order in which you have your cameras. So we're going to play through camera 2, camera 2, camera 2, and then when we hit this spot right here, this is where we want camera 2 to go away. So I'm going to keyframe that. And now let's add a new camera and a new null. Throw camera 3 into null 3. With camera 3, reset parameters. Let's zoom on out. And with the null, I'm going to take this null and I'm going to rotate it in the negative direction. So we're above the MO2 stage. And now, I said most of the time I leave the nulls for rotation and the camera for the positions, but I'm going to come in here and also do some rotation on the camera itself. If I rotate on the Z, I'm going to put it at about 180. I'm going to keyframe that. I'm going to keyframe the Z position. And actually I want it to be quite a bit farther out. I'm going to come to the null, I'm going to keyframe that rotation, and I'm going to fast forward ahead to my next transition. And what I want to happen here is I want this to go back to pretty much 0. And you may be thinking, oh, it's upside down. But remember, for camera 3, we had some rotation going on as well. So I'm going to twist this around like that, pretty much back to 360, or I could have done 0, depending on which way you want to rotate, clockwise or counterclockwise. And when you combine these two together, watch this. Here's camera 3. So it's spinning. That's a nice smooth transition. But I forgot one thing. Camera 3, I also want to make this thing get closer to the MO2. So maybe somewhere in here. Let's highlight all of them. Make the interpolations to linear for both the camera and the null. And here we go. Camera 2 over to camera 3. So now we have that twist that appears and it's getting closer to the letters MO2. And now we're ready to jump to our last camera, which we're just going to zoom out from this. To do that, I'm going to add another camera, make sure I have it in the correct order. Camera 4, and I'm not going to put this one in a null because all I want this camera to do is simply change its Z position, kind of zoom out from this. But before I do that, I need to come back to camera 3. Let's keyframe the visibility. From the beginning, I definitely want camera 3 to be visible, but again, we won't see camera 3 until camera 1 is not visible, then camera 2 has to be not visible, and then we switch to camera 3. But then when we hit right here, set it to not visible, and now we are on camera 4. So here's camera 4. I'm going to reset its parameters. I'm going to come out just a hair, right about there, to where we can see most of the MO2 letters. Keyframe its position, go to the end of the project, and have this zooming way on out. Interpolation of the basic position set to linear, and we have our cameras done. So we got camera 1's visible, camera 1's visible, then we have camera 2 right here. Then we have camera 3, and then when it becomes not visible, we do the zoom out for camera 4. The last thing we need to add is a light. So let's add a sphere light. And in perspective view, you can see we got cameras all over the place and they're moving all around, coming in, coming out. And I'm going to take this light here and I'm going to slide it behind the stage. And with the light selected, I do not want to render the shape, so I'm going to uncheck that. Let's go back to active camera, and we can see some of the light reflecting off the letters. You can see that more when I uncheck this box. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer, negative 0.5 maybe, just to bring it a little bit closer to the stage, but it's still not coming through the stage. Now if we did bring it through the stage, that would change things as well, as you can see. So I'm putting it behind the stage. Negative 0.3 doesn't look too bad either. Now if we move this up and down, we get some reflection. Not much. We definitely get it here on the ends and up here at the top as well. But what I want to do with this is I want to animate this right when we hit to camera 3. Right there, I want this light to come on. So to make this light come on, I'm going to create a keyframe, make it visible here. Then I'm going to scrub back to the beginning and make this light not visible. So that definitely does change the way things look. So no light, no light, no light, no light, and then boom, it comes on right when we hit to camera 3. But I also want to keyframe the position. So I'm going to go to perspective, and when we cut this light on, I actually want it to be down here, and I'm going to keyframe this somewhere around -2. Doesn't really matter, you can tweak this to your liking as well. So keyframing that, and then as we come all the way to here, this is where we switch over to camera 4, right there, that marker. I want its position to go up to a +2. Set this interpolation to linear. If we go to the active camera, here's what we got going on. So we have this light coming through here, and that looks pretty good the way it is. And then when we hit right here to camera 4, as we're zooming out, I want this light to again start to move back down, and I'm going to take it all the way to the end, and I'm going to tell this light to move back down to a -2. So that shot it from up here to down here, and let me go change that to linear one more time. So let's check it out. This is camera 3. Jump into camera 4. We don't get as much reflection there, and we can go in there and we can change some of the effects. We definitely see the light there. But here at the end, you know, we don't get a lot. We get a little bit on the MO2. And then as we hit right here at the end, you can see the bottom light up. But you can mess around with the light. You can adjust the intensity, the light radius, and all that stuff. But for the most part, that's the whole thing from start to finish. The only other thing I would do here is go to my project pane for my project, add a behavior, basic motion, fade in and out. From there, when I go to share it, export movie, make sure that you have the render quality set to best. And that's pretty much it. Feel free to share a link to your video below. And if you have any questions or comments, leave that below as well. If you'd like to see more tutorials, feel free to head over to my website, www.bcraftmath.com, and you can make a request for an MO2 tutorial. Really enjoyed doing this. This is my first one, and that's it for this video. I hope it helped.